Good morning. This is Brittany Colonna reporting live from New York City.
And this is Reiko Corlapara, also reporting live from New York City.
This just in. Railroad workers in Kalamazoo, Michigan have been on strike since yesterday, July 14th, 2012, in response to outrageous wage cuts. They have brought the railroad system in Michigan to a halt, refusing to allow any railroad cars to leave the station until wages are returned to normal. This uprising is no surprise, though. The recession has led to wage cuts in every major industry so far, causing workers to become restless. Unions are working with railroad owners to compromise on issues at hand.
The situation is reminiscent of the Great Railroad Strikes of 1877, which began on July 14th, exactly 135 years ago. In 1873, an economic crisis wiped out small businesses, bringing cold, hunger, and death to the working class, while the rich continued to grow richer and happier. By 1877, the U.S. was entering the fourth year of its depression, which was closely related to a collapse in the railroad industry. Horrible conditions and low wages placed a heavy burden on the poor. On July 14th, in Martinsburg, West Virginia, railroad workers at the Baltimore and Ohio station went on strike, declaring that no trains would leave the station until the additional 10% wage cuts on their already low wages was canceled. President Hayes sent in federal troops to bring the insurrection to an end, and the freight cars began to move again.
On July 21st in Baltimore, Maryland, a crowd sympathetic to the railroad strikers surrounded the armory of the National Guard, hurling rocks at it. The 6th Regiment came out and fired at the crowd. In the end, 10 strikers were dead. More were badly wounded, and 1 soldier was injured.
The rebellion continued to spread westward. Once it hit Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, local officials declared that the Pittsburgh militia would not kill their fellow townsmen and called for Philadelphia troops. When they arrived, rocks and gunfire were exchanged between the crowd and the troops. At least 10 people were killed. The city was outraged. Railroad cars were set on fire and buildings were burned to the ground, including the armory itself.
The strike soon spread to Chicago. Fear gripped the country as Chicago Times headline read, "Terrors reign, the streets of Chicago given over to howling mobs of thieves and cutthroats." The Working Men's Party, which was connected to Marx's First International, had several thousand members in Chicago, and in the summer of 1877, 6,000 of them railed during the strikes, demanding nationalization of the railroads. The next day, a different crowd began to shut down railroads, factories, and shipyards throughout the city. The police attacked the crowd and were later joined by 2 companies of the U.S. infantry. 3 men were killed. The next day, the police fought a crowd of 5,000 armed protesters. 18 men were killed.
In St. Louis, the Working Men's Party called a mass meeting where a group of 5,000 people called for the nationalization of all industry, including railroads. The party encouraged general strikes around the city and rallies at which 10,000 people listened to communist speakers.
Police, militia, and federal troops eventually ended the strikes and arrested strike leaders. In total, 100,000 workers had gone on strike, 100 people died, and 1,000 were arrested as a result of the Great Railroad Strikes of 1877. The railroads made some concessions and withdrew some wage cuts, improving the lives of their workers, but they also strengthened their coal and iron police in an attempt to prevent future strikes.
Time has shown that economic crisis causes workers to adopt more radical tactics than they would use during times of economic growth. Desperate times call for desperate measures.
Indeed, Reika. It took 45 days for the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 to come to an end. Let's hope that Kalamazoo workers and the railroad owners will be able to compromise in less time.
Thank you and good night.